The quiet room. It started in a quiet room. Just a person and a dream. A simple dream, really. To share something with the world. To create, to connect, to matter. Hours were spent in that quiet space. Learning, planning, building. The work began. Videos were made, edited, and uploaded. Each one sent out like a message in a bottle, following all the advice. Crafting careful thumbnails. Researching keywords. Trying to play by the rules of the platform. Believing that consistency was key, that effort would be rewarded, that the algorithm would eventually notice. But the numbers stayed stubbornly still. Day after day, week after week. The graphs remained flat lines. Views were low. Consistently, dishearteningly low. Often just a handful. Sometimes zero. Likes were rare. Comments were almost non-existent. The silence was deafening. It felt like shouting into a vast, empty space. A void that swallowed every word, every image, every effort. A profound feeling of invisibility settled in. Was anyone out there? Could anyone hear? Yet the initial belief was strong. The conviction that hard work, persistence, and passion would eventually break through, that the message would find its audience. That hope was the fuel. It powered the late nights and the early mornings. It pushed back the creeping doubt. The quiet room held the echoes of that initial optimism. The belief that this creative journey was meant to be. That the effort would pay off. But the reality outside the quiet room was different. The digital world felt indifferent. Unresponsive. The dream felt fragile. Tested by the silence, challenged by the lack of any visible impact. Still, the creator kept going, driven by that initial spark, uploading the next video, and the next, holding on to the hope that tomorrow would be different, that the corner would be turned, that the message would finally land. The struggle, the hard truth. Then came the moment of confrontation. The daily ritual of opening the YouTube dashboard. A moment filled with a mix of hope and dread. Mostly dread, as time went on. Because the harsh reality was always the same. Disappointing metrics stared back. Low views. Fewer likes than the day before. Still no comments. Just the stark, cold numbers. This wasn't a one-time setback. This was the pattern. The repetition of disappointment became a heavy weight. Each check of the dashboard was a reminder. A fresh wave of that amplified feeling. The feeling of being invisible. Of shouting into a void that simply didn't care. The initial dream, once so vibrant, began to fade. Like a photograph left too long in the sun, its colors leaching away. Self-doubt, a quiet intruder at first, grew louder. It started whispering insidious questions. Maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe my ideas aren't interesting. Maybe I don't have what it takes. The whispers became shouts. The temptation to quit became almost overwhelming. It felt like the most logical option. Maybe I should stop. What's the point of all this effort? Why keep pouring energy into something that yields nothing? The thoughts circled, relentless. The doubts were no longer just whispers. They were a roaring chorus, drowning out the original motivation. The passion that had started it all felt distant, almost forgotten. The question of purpose loomed large. Why create when no one is watching? What is the value in speaking when there is no audience to hear? The joy of creation was being overshadowed by the pain of rejection. Or worse, the pain of being ignored completely. Every upload felt heavier. Every idea felt less exciting. The quiet room, once a sanctuary of dreams, started to feel like a cage of frustration. The comparison trap was everywhere. Seeing others with soaring views, engaged communities, and tangible success, it amplified the feeling of failure. It felt like being stuck, trapped in a cycle of effort and disappointment. The path forward seemed blocked. The energy required to keep going felt immense, almost impossible to muster. The thought of giving up offered a strange kind of relief, an end to the struggle. But deep down, the thought of abandoning the dream hurt even more. It was a painful paradox: stay and suffer, or leave and regret. The struggle was real, it was daily. It was exhausting. It tested the very core of why the creator had started in the first place. The silence of the void felt personal, like a judgment, a verdict on the worth of the creative voice. The dream was on the verge of breaking. The creator was standing at the edge, looking into the abyss of giving up. The weight of the hard truth felt unbearable. The realization, a whisper from within. Then, in the midst of the deepest struggle, something shifted. It wasn't a loud revelation, it was a small voice. A whisper from inside. It cut through the noise of doubt and disappointment. It spoke a truth that was uncomfortable but necessary. The whisper said, "You've been hiding." It was a simple statement, but it landed with profound weight. Hiding? How could that be? The creator was putting everything out there. Or so it seemed. Then the whisper continued. "You've been following trends, not your truth." This hit even harder. Acknowledging the truth of that internal message was difficult. It meant admitting something fundamental was wrong. Not with the platform or the audience, but with the approach. The focus had been misplaced. The priority had become chasing views, chasing numbers, instead of chasing meaning. The creative process had become about conforming, trying to fit into predefined boxes, making content that looked like what was already popular, trying to replicate success instead of defining it on personal terms. This led to a lack of authenticity, not being fully, genuinely real in the work, putting on a performance instead of sharing a piece of the soul. The content felt hollow, even to the creator. And if it felt hollow to the creator, how could it resonate with anyone else? The audience, or the potential audience, could feel the lack of genuineness. They weren't connecting because there was nothing truly authentic to connect with. The message in the bottle was generic, not personal. The realization was painful, but also liberating. The problem wasn't necessarily the lack of audience, it was the lack of true self in the work. The energy spent chasing trends was energy not spent exploring the unique voice. The focus on external validation had overshadowed the internal purpose. The quiet room had become a factory for generic content, not a studio for authentic expression. The whisper wasn't a criticism. It was a guide, a redirection. It pointed back to the core reason for creating in the first place. It wasn't about being seen by everyone. It was about being true to oneself and trusting that the right people would find that truth. The realization wasn't a sudden fix. It was a dawning, a slow understanding that the path forward required a fundamental change in perspective. It wasn't about working harder at the wrong thing. It was about finding the right thing to work on, the thing that felt deeply, undeniably true. The whisper from within was the turning point. It offered a new lens through which to view the struggle. It wasn't failure, it was misalignment. It was a call to come home, to the authentic self, to the stories that truly mattered, to the unique perspective that only this one creator could offer. The void wasn't empty, it was waiting for something real, something true. The shift, starting again, but true. The realization led to a decision. Not the decision to quit, which had been so tempting, but the decision to change, to pivot, to start again, but this time, true. The action taken was internal first, a deep dive inward, a period of reflection and honest self-inquiry, asking the hard questions. What stories did she truly want to tell? Not what stories were popular, but what stories burned within her. What topics genuinely fascinated her? What perspectives did she hold that felt unique and important to share? Asking what felt true to her core values. What principles guided her life? How could those be reflected in her creative work? This wasn't about finding a niche for views. It was about finding the authentic voice, the intersection of passion, purpose, and personality. The process was slow. It required letting go of old habits, letting go of the need for external approval, letting go of the fear of not being liked. It required courage. The courage to be vulnerable, to share the messy, imperfect, real self. The content began to change. It wasn't about trends anymore. It was about truth. It was about sharing personal experiences, genuine thoughts, and unique insights. The focus shifted from, what will people watch, to, what do I need to create? The energy changed. It felt lighter, more joyful. The quiet room became a space of exploration again, a place to experiment, to play, to express, without the pressure of performance. The numbers didn't change overnight. The views didn't suddenly skyrocket. But something more important happened. The creator reconnected with the joy of creation itself. The act of making something meaningful felt rewarding, regardless of the external response. And slowly, subtly, things began to shift externally too. The few comments that appeared were different. They were deeper, more personal. People weren't just saying, nice video. They were saying, I felt that. You put words to something I've been feeling. Thank you for being real. The connection wasn't based on a shared interest in a trend. It was based on a shared human experience, on authenticity, meeting authenticity. The audience that started to gather was smaller, perhaps, but they were engaged. They were present. They were connecting with the true self that was finally being shared. The feeling of shouting into a void began to dissipate. It was replaced by the feeling of speaking to kindred spirits, to people who resonated with the truth being offered. This shift wasn't about finding a magic formula for success. It was about finding the courage to be oneself, and trusting that the right audience would be drawn to that authenticity. The journey wasn't over. There were still challenges, still moments of doubt. But the foundation had changed. It was built on truth, not on trends. The creator who almost gave up found a new reason to keep going, not for the views, but for the connection. Not for the numbers, but for the meaning. The quiet room was no longer a place of frustration. It was a place of purpose, a place where the authentic voice was finally being heard, first by the creator, and then by those who needed to hear it most. The struggle had led to a realization. The realization had led to a shift. And the shift had led to a deeper, more meaningful creative journey, one built on the solid ground of being true